Hi. Hey, week two of our fourth quarter, and we have a special guest to help us with vocab today. It's Adi. So, can you go ahead and grab your notebook, find yourself, of course, to the vocab section, and you're actually going to add 7 rows here if you're working with your old notebook, or occupy 7 rows if you're working with the new notebook. Again, imagery, green word, you don't need to write that one out, but we're going to go ahead and jump right in with extended metaphor. So metaphor is probably something you have heard in an English class before. It's likening to unlike things and not using a comparison word like or as. That would make it a simile. A simile is my shoes smell like garbage. A metaphor would be my shoes are garbage. My shoes are trash, right? My sister is the devil. There's no like or as. It's not a comparison. Another thing that metaphors frequently get mixed up with is analogy. An analogy is more like a comparison for the purpose of explaining something. I use analogies in class all of the time. So when we talk about extended metaphors, what we're really looking at is a comparison between two unlike things that is extended, that continues through a series of sentences in a paragraph or lines in a poem. So when you're doing your creative writing, as you're describing a character, and if you weave in a metaphor, can you bring out other characteristics of that metaphor and then apply them to that character? We're going to do a little practice with that later this week. Everything else that we're writing down has to do with imagery. So oftentimes when we talk about imagery, we mostly just picture visual imagery, and this was a pattern I saw come up in your narrative writing. There's a lot of really solid description about the way a classroom looked or the way your grandparents' house looked. But I want to open our definition by including these other aspects of imagery. So can you record auditory imagery, what the reader can hear; tactile imagery, what the reader can touch or feel physically. Like this could be something like temperature. It could also be something like the smoothness of an animal's fur, right? Olfactory imagery, that's what the reader can smell. Organic imagery is stuff that has more to do with how you're feeling, not in a temperature or tactile sense, but in like a how your body feels: body ache, hunger, thirst, fatigue, nausea. Gustatory imagery, my favorite, what the reader can taste, right? If you've ever read any Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin, there are fantastic scenes where it's just dripping with gustatory imagery when they're at like a big feast. And then kinesthetic imagery, imagery of movement or tension. This often could be an example of like when we talk about blocking, that's often kinesthetic imagery, imagery of movement of your character. So this image is a little juvenile, I will admit, but it does give us kind of really some specifics here. When you're talking about how something tastes, can you talk about the bitter, the salty, the sweet, the acidic? Can you talk about colors, patterns, shapes, sizes, music, silence, noise, background? I want you to keep all of these in mind when we talk about imagery. Take a moment and record out auditory, tactile, olfactory, organic, gustatory, and kinesthetic imagery now. All right. So I just want to show you a couple of quick examples here, keeping in mind that you are coming up with your own examples or related images for the vocab section, that third column in your notes. That's always popping up there. Make sure that that happens. Here's one. The engine clanks, which makes the guys in the back holler something obscene. Again, I'm hearing both the engine and the call of the guys in the back of the machine shop or whatever, right? What would that make that? Auditory, what the reader can hear in one's mind because of the language. Now, oftentimes it's not just like sentence per sentence. Sometimes they're really blended together, right? So I wanted to read you this one as well. Not daring to open her eyes, she groaned and brushed bits of nature from her hair, wishing some of the other remnants from last night could be as easily swept away. Everything reeked of stale liquor, pine needles, and mistakes. Her skin itched and crawled, and the only thing worse than the spinning in her head was the twisted soreness in her back and neck. Why had she thought falling asleep outside was a brilliant idea? So we've got a little bit of kinesthetic imagery here in she groaned and brushed bits. We've seen body movement, right? Then we've got our olfactory imagery. Everything reeked of stale liquor, pine needles, and mistake. Then we've got tactile imagery. Her skin itched and crawled. And then we've got the twisted soreness in her back and neck. Then we've got organic imagery, how it feels in her body, right? Within this, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences, we can see 4 or maybe even 5 different types of imagery. That's what we're aiming for, being able to include all of these pieces or many of these pieces in your descriptions in your creative writing. All right, you know the deal. Take that vocab quiz. See ya.